Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Father Bernie Sienna, co-chair of the Mental Health and Wellbeing Committee here at Villanova, along with Candace Post, Dr. Candace Post from the Counseling Office, who is there in the back. We're very happy to have you here today as we continue this speaker series on the important topic of suicide prevention. So I would like the moderator of today, Dr. Alessandra Seggi, to come forward and then to take over and introduce our speaker and moderate our discussion.
Thank you, Father Bernie. Welcome, everybody, to the third event of the series Systemic Issues Around Youth and Suicide. So today, we're going to discuss and try to understand suicide prevention. We have a very distinguished speaker with whom I'm going to have a conversation, Dr. Jill Harkavy-Friedman. She's Senior Vice President for Research at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which she joined in 2011. We'll hear more, of course, about the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and what it does and what Dr. Harkavy-Friedman does in it. But her experience is also as a clinician and as a researcher. And as such, she has published over 100 articles, and her peer-reviewed articles, of course, and has trained clinicians across the United States. She's also a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and she received her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, so close by, and her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Florida. She joined the Montefiore Medical Center, the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, where she established a particularly innovative program, the Adolescent Depression and Suicide Program. And then in the late 90s, she moved to Columbia University, the New York State Psychiatric Institute, where she's, to this day, an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry. Before we welcome Dr. Harkavy-Friedman to the stage and to our conversation, let me remind everybody that the topic of suicide, of course, is a complex topic. It's a sensitive topic. Should any of you or any you know feel in distress or in a crisis right now or throughout the talk, Father Bernie is available, and so is Candace Post right here in the back. Raise your hand. Thank you. You can reach out to her. She's one of our counselors in the counseling center. And you know, of course, of the counseling center itself here at Villanova. In case of an acute crisis, the newly founded 988 number also is a possibility. I encourage you to stay till the end of our discussion so that you can ask questions to our speaker. And I hope this conversation will help us advance our understanding of the complexity of suicides and the ramifications of it on ourselves and our loved ones. Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Harkavy-Friedman.
Hi, everyone.
So good afternoon, everybody. So maybe let's start, I don't know if it's simple, but possibly, hopefully easy. How did you get involved with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention?
The short answer is I got my first grant from we call it AFSP, American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. So between Harkavy-Friedman and American Foundation, it's a lot of initials, so we'll just go with Jill and AFSP. I actually got my first grant from AFSP in 1992. And it was on understanding suicidal behavior in people with schizophrenia. But I did start in the field in '85. So.
And what brought you to the broader sort of field of psychiatry then, or psychology?
Psychology,
so, yes.
yeah.
Very different, related, but different.
I actually always wanted to be a psychologist, to tell you the truth. I happen to like people, and I also always want to understand what's going on with them, and I always like to help people. And so honestly, on my college application, that's what I put. I want to be a clinical psychologist, and I want to do research and help people. Throughout my career, people had issue with both halves of those, but I've managed to do both all the way along. So I always wanted to be a psychologist, but when I was in college, I took a lot of other classes, economics, chemistry, calculus, don't ask me why. But at the same time, I worked in a couple of labs as a volunteer, and I also got to work as a volunteer on the psychiatric unit for 3 years. So it just confirmed my interest in becoming a psychologist. And I was lucky enough to get into graduate school right after college, which I'm not sure I recommend. I think it's actually helps to ripen on the vine a little bit. But I did go to University of Florida. I have to say, go Gators. And also, they're probably going to be in the March Madness, so that has to be considered, which is quite different from Philadelphia. I went to Penn long time ago in the middle of Philly. And I chose that school because it had the only hospital-based program in clinical psychology. And I knew I wanted to work in medical settings. So, and the rest is history. I did my master's and dissertation there. I did my internship at Yale New Haven Hospital. And then I went to Montefiore in a clinical line with 8 hours for research, so 1 day for research.
Wow. So thank you. Before we get to the specifics of what AFSP does and your role in it, the research, the community outreach, the educational sort of part of the organization, I would love for you to sort of guide us through sort of the importance of talking about suicide and the importance of suicide prevention. One of the myths that I often sort of bring up when discussing suicidality, suicidal ideation or behavior or whatever facets of it, besides the complexity of it, one of the myths is the idea that if we actually talk about it, we'd sort of somehow implant the idea in people's heads of proceeding with suicide. So again, yes, why is it so important to talk about suicide and suicide prevention?
So actually, quite honestly, this is how I ended up getting into suicide. I got to Einstein. I was given a day for research. The chair of the department, and this is going somewhere, the chair of the department wanted to study adolescent suicide. And I like to say it was like, I was once at a wedding where the bride made all the women line up and then turned around and threw her bouquet, and we all stepped back and it fell on the floor. Well, that's what it was like for suicide. Nobody would do it. For 3 years, he was trying to do that, and I was like, I'll do it. So that was the state of the art in 1984, really, 85. Nobody would talk about it. There was a paper that was written in 1990 that suggested that if you talk about suicide, it could be harmful and maybe even make people suicidal. Well, I went back to the paper and read it. And actually, it was a study of 14-year-old boys who had made suicide attempts who were asked, do you think if we talked to other people about it, they would be uncomfortable? And they said yes. And that was the origin of the myth. Don't talk about it. You'll create it. Now, suicide is so much more complex than that. And since then, a lot of research has happened. And what we've learned is not only is it important to talk about suicide, but that when somebody is thinking about it, it actually opens them up. It opens up the door for them, and often they'll feel better. Rarely, I haven't heard of people actually feeling worse. They may step back. They may say, no, I'm not thinking about it. But suicide is complex, and I can talk about that if you want.
Absolutely, please.
So the way we think about suicide is, and this has come from all the research since then, because nobody was looking into it before, a person might have some underlying contributors that if in the right it's very dynamic and complex. So things like having a mental health condition, which almost everybody who dies by suicide has, but most people who have mental health conditions do not die by suicide. So having a chronic health condition or chronic pain or a head injury or a family history of mental health conditions or suicide, early childhood adversity, genetics, all these things can contribute. But a person isn't at risk all the time. They have all these factors, but we know any one of us could have these factors. It doesn't mean we're at risk. But sometimes in the context of stress, these factors come together such that a person will have a suicidal crisis. And in that crisis, which we know will pass, if they have access to lethal means, they could die. So you have this underlying, it's not, I don't like to say risk because it's not like a person is walking around at risk. But when those factors come together in the context of stress, that can increase to a suicidal crisis. Now, during that crisis, the person's thinking becomes very narrow, like a tunnel vision. Like, nothing matters anymore. My friends will be better off without me. I'm just a burden. Nothing, my life is over. I'm in so much pain that I just want the pain to stop. So it's not even really about dying. The problem is if you have access to lethal means, you could die. Again, we know that if people get through that moment, and so if you know anybody who's feeling that way, getting them help and having that conversation is really important, because we know that that moment will crescendo, but then it will also decline. And most people, for instance, who make a suicide attempt do not die by suicide. There's a real difference between people who think about it, people who make an attempt, and people who die. But they're kind of overlapping groups. It's like, finally get to use your Venn diagrams. Because some people, many people think about it, doesn't mean they're at risk. Fewer people make an attempt, about 1.3 million last year, and then about 49,000 people died by suicide. So they're not 100% the same people. And that's what actually part of our mission is to remind people that just because someone's thinking about it, and by thinking about it, there's a whole array of thoughts. It could be something like, I don't want to wake up, to I want to take my life. And we're trying to teach people to distinguish between those things because the actions that you take will be different. So a person can have that range of behavior, and having a conversation can open up that tunnel vision. And you might have heard a lot about people needing to connect, that they're not connected. And at some level, that's true. But because of the way the brain is functioning, I think of it as they have like a disconnection, a DYS connection, a dysfunctional connection. Not that they're not connected. Like they could say, I love my family, and my family loves me. You can't get more connected than that. But they'll be better off without me. And that's where the decision-making is affected, right? Because they won't be better off without them. And they're not a burden. They may take some attention, but they're not a burden. And once you help people to open up that tunnel vision, they usually can find some other solutions. They can start working with people. They can reconnect. So while people who may be in a suicidal crisis might pull away from people and not feel connected, they can simultaneously feel connected.
Yeah, thank you. I actually tackle very sensitively, hopefully, the subject of suicide even in my intro to sociology courses, because one of the founders of sociology, as the students among the audience know, my students know very well, one of the founders of sociology, Emil Durkheim, right, sort of used the study of suicide to say, hey, what sociology has to offer is so important, even when we focus and study a complex situation, suicide, which traditionally, right, has been tackled only from the inside out. But instead, if we look at suicide with the tools of sociology, again, looking at external factors, the social pressures, or again, the social protective factors, right, as we would say today, we can learn so much more, again, about that complexity, right, that you addressed, that we'll understand that sociology is indeed important. We need to study sociology. Now, fast forward to today, and we are in a different, with the Department of Ed, in a different situation, but that's for another talk and another talk series. But from that perspective, teasing out the outside sort of factors, both protective and risk factors that come from the social world, is so important. And to your point, Jill, if I may address you as Jill, thank you. The idea that sometimes, or the reality that sometimes when people express their suicidal feelings or ideation or intent, and we rush to escalate the issue, rightly so, because we care, for the lives of other people. But there have been sort of reports and studies that sort of show how sometimes that sort of escalation becomes counterproductive to that important sharing moment, sharing of the pain, of the suffering that perhaps that individual is experiencing, and not to discredit or discount the escalation and the presence of first responders or whatever the specifics of the professionals involved, but that perhaps, right, shouldn't necessarily invalidate the opportunity or nullify the opportunity to share that pain, because, right, possibly, precisely when that pain is shared, then it stops being unbearable, right?
Right. And so it's not a cure, and you're not expected to become a therapist. It's just it just takes the immediacy and the urgency out of it. It doesn't solve the problems. And one of the things that's really important about 988, which it was a big win to get 988, and we're hoping they don't defund it. They've already defunded the part of the Veterans Crisis Line, which is part of 988. So we'll have to see what happens in the next, seems like for a few weeks. But we've funded people to study it. And how does it work? And what do the counselors do? And that actually what seems to happen is a person comes on, and through listening and understanding, they're able to de-escalate a little bit to get to the point to maybe do some immediate problem solving. And then if things get escalated again, which they do because the person is in distress, then they do more active listening and really help the person know that they're being listened to, that they're being understood, that this is serious. And then together, they're able to do next steps, including helping someone get help in their community. I want to say something about what you said about sociology, because, by the way, we have funded some ethnological research about suicide, and we think of suicide as a public health problem. And use the public health model, which talks about the population level of intervention, the community level, the family level, and the individual level. And so we think about, for instance, limiting access to lethal means is something that can happen on the population level through education. Because remember what I said is if you're in that moment and you have access to lethal means, you could die. And there are programs to help people limit access to lethal means, to help, like your primary care clinician talk to you about securing lethal means, especially if you're in a time of crisis. So it is a public health problem, and there are different levels of intervention, and there are different levels of contribution. Things like long-term discrimination and aggression and experience of violence, those kinds of things can exacerbate one's threshold for the way stress affects them. And as you might remember, stress is part of it. So it is a sociological issue, it's a community issue, it's also a personal issue. So.
Yeah, and sometimes in that round, right, we discuss the biopsychosocial model, right, to discuss the sort of manifestations of suicidality, and in particular the etiology, the causations, right, the causes of suicide. But also in terms of sort of curbing that almost impulsivity, right? That sort of tunnel vision that comes at that moment when, right, nothing is, so to speak, good enough, and so the worst might happen. In fact, there is a related myth, the idea, oh, well, if we, deny access to certain means now, but then that person may actually complete their suicide later on. That sometimes does happen, but not most of the times, correct?
Right, because it's in the moment.
Exactly.
Because it's in the moment. So there's two ways in which that works. One is in that moment, they won't die. And then the other is that if they do something, they won't die from it. Now, that's not to say that they're not going to have other suicidal crises. And in that moment, you still want to limit access to lethal means. But in that moment, if you limit access, even if they do something else, which is unusual, they probably won't die from it. And most people who survive a suicide attempt or a suicidal crisis are ultimately, I'm not saying immediately, but ultimately glad that they're still here.
Yes.
And I want to just mention one of our programs that we did with the Ad Council and the JED Foundation, which is called Seize the Awkward. It's a completely online program. Has anybody here seen Seize the Awkward? It's a really great program. It's meant for people 16 to 22, although I love it and I'm almost 68. So, but it's a way to understand what should make you worry about someone, like your friend. It's not meant for me, I just like it. But how can you identify when your friend might be struggling? It doesn't even have to be in a crisis, but headed that way. And how can you have that conversation with them? And it literally gives you the words of what you can say and how to say it when you're worried about somebody. And then it helps you to make opportunities for that conversation with your friend. So they recommend, having coffee together, going for a walk together. I'm not going to list them all. They're all very things that we all do, but it gives us the words and how to understand what's going on, how to approach somebody, and how to have a conversation with them and to help them get help. And it's seizetheawkward.org. That's the website. And I encourage everybody to go there because it's very accessible and really helpful.
Thank you. And so this, again, speaks to the importance, right, of suicide prevention in terms of sort of blocking access to lethal means, and in that regard, not just firearms, but places like famously the Golden Gate Bridge, right, that finally has succeeded in obtaining, not it, but yes, it does have now a barrier, but it's through the hard work of a wide network of organizations and activists that, countering the saying that, oh, if we put a barrier there, then people will find another place. Usually, right, that is not
and
the
in fact,
case.
they just came out with data that showed that they chose to put a net underneath, and I think net is a kind word for what they really put under there, which is a wire mesh thing. So you just break a few bones. A net would have, something on the bridge is preferable, but they just came out with data showing that it's already markedly reduced the number of people who've taken their lives there. And there's more and more data. It's kind of a cool story. Like the idea of limiting access to lethal means came in England when they changed the amount of carbon monoxide in the gas, which was a way that people used in those days. And they noticed that the suicide rate went down. And it didn't go up in any other method. And they realized that it was because people were using their ovens it sounds weird now, but they realized that intervention of just, deciding to lower the carbon monoxide in oven gas, coal gas, actually saved lives. And then there was another study, it wasn't a study, it was a happening, a natural event. There was a bridge in Australia that they had a lot of deaths from. Then the bridge was under construction and you couldn't get on it, and they noticed that the deaths decreased. But then they finished fixing the bridge and the barriers were taken down, and then the rate went back up. So then they permanently put up barriers and the rate has gone down. So that's a natural experiment. And for those of you who know what I'm talking about, it was an ABA design, right? You have it is what it is, you have an intervention, you take away the intervention, and that's how you demonstrate if something has had an effect or not. And so since then, we've done a lot of advocating for limiting access to lethal means, and it works. It really works.
Yeah, and it speaks to the saying by Edwin Schneidman, one of the fathers of the multidisciplinary field of suicidology, sort of studying, again, suicide from a lot of different perspectives: psychology, sociology, public health, other disciplines, biology, neurobiology, etc. The idea that we either release the tension, again, this tunnel vision, or in very graphic form, he said, the bullet. So again, if we don't have lethal means available, we can indeed save lives.
Just in a word, Ed Schneidman started the suicide prevention Lifeline, and he caught a lot of flack for it because people thought, that's not going to work. You can't just have a conversation and save a life. And now we have them in all 50 states in a national 988, and it actually saves a lot of lives. So if you have an idea, everybody's gotten very creative in this area, and it's really working to save lives. And feel free to write to me with your idea. I just got a high school student wrote to me about an idea of putting 988 on pill bottle caps. And we happen to work with some of the drugstore companies, and we're actually looking into it to see if we can do that. So if you have ideas, and I want to expand on what you said, which is that any profession, any area of research can get involved in suicide prevention, whether it's computer or biology, like you said, chemistry, mental health fields, art. It's really quite striking. It's one field that whatever your interest is, whatever profession you go into, there's a place for you in suicide prevention, on top of your own personal human interest in suicide prevention and attending some of our, we have Out of the Darkness walks. I don't know, does Villanova have an Out of the Darkness walk?
Not yet. I run as an individual with my husband as a duo, but I think it's in the works, right? That they are trying to. I suggested it as a campus walk, right? Out of Darkness as a campus walk. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe I could say a word about our walk.
And the logo right there, From Darkness to Light, right, was Father Bernie's idea, having told him about how I have joined the Out of Darkness walk every first Sunday in October for as far as I've lived here. So
I did too when I was in Columbia. I was in the first walk. So we have these Out of the Darkness walks, and they're community walks, and then we have campus walks now. I think there's over 100 campuses now that have walks. And the idea of the walk is to raise awareness. We do happen to fundraise from it, but you do not have to donate in order to walk. You just have to register so we know that you're there. And I can't tell you how many people that I've met who lost somebody to suicide and was keeping it inside, and then they showed up. They saw a sign. Usually that's the way. I saw a sign, and so I went, and they see all these people who actually understand how they feel. And we have a system called honor beads. So you can have different color beads for different relationships to suicide. If you lost a spouse or a child or a parent or military, or you support LGBTQ+, or you just support the cause, or you personally struggle, or somebody you care about struggles, everyone, or you have a relative. I end up wearing 4 different pairs of beads for relatives who've died by suicide, relatives who struggle. I support the cause, and I support LGBTQ+ populations. So when you walk into the walk, which is outside, so you don't actually walk into it, you can tell, and you could find somebody who has a similar experience to you. And it's really an aha moment for people. And it's also a lot of fun. It sounds like it wouldn't be, but there's a sober moment when we recognize the people that we've lost. But people come year after year, they form groups, they have T-shirts with pictures on them, and you walk down the street and people are like, what are you walking for? To prevent suicide, and they honk and they clap. For me, it's particularly rewarding because I started in the time when nobody would say the word. And you can see, I've had people say, oh, I want to do that. I've lost someone. And so it really is out of the darkness. I would say we raise about 60% of our funds that way. Small donations. Like, this is not a big donor thing. We have a lot of events like that. We also have an Out of the Darkness overnight, which is in Philly fairly regularly. This year it's in New York City. It's 16 to 18 miles, and it starts in the evening. And you walk through the night. And, it ends in usually, well, I've done it 6 times already, and it's a long walk, but it's amazing. And then when you get there, so I usually finish around 3:30 or 4. Some people finish at 5. They have excellent breakfast when you get there. But that's the only walk that you have to raise money for, because we have to have things like porta potties. We give snacks. We give midnight dinner or snack, but so you do have to raise for that. And about 2,000 people walked this past June. And if you're into exercise and walking, it's a great way to support a cause at the same time. We have hugging stations. When you get to certain points, there are people hugging and cheering you on. It's really quite an event.
Yeah, I think a lot of people that sort of, to speak, end up in this line of work, and I speak from experience, is, yes, there is the sociological component, there's the professional component, but absolutely, suicide touched me. I lost people to suicide, so I had to do something. So, and I did it as recently as last week. In the town where I'm from, there was a horrible car accident that resulted in one individual dying because of the car crash, and the other individual killing themselves. And I could not sit still and read the news reporting abhorrent details on the methods and drawing conclusions, about the reason why one of the two ended up killing themselves. And so it was hard, but I said, if I need to really walk the walk here, and I did some online searches. I reached out to 4 local newspapers, and I said, I'm sorry, but the WHO guidelines on how to report of suicide do not recommend including these details: gory, useless, unkind. They don't add anything. Actually, they may make somebody feel worse. And what conclusions are you drawing? They are gone, so nobody knows what happened.
In fact,
and even if, right, it's so. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we funded research that showed that, how the media reports about suicide is very important in terms of either instigating other people acting or preventing suicide. So like you said, and we have media guidelines on our website, and we talk a lot. I talk a lot with media, and really try to explain to them the reason that it's not helpful. But yeah, you don't want to put suicide or the method in the title, because you might not be writing the only article also. There may be multiple articles, so that in your face. There's no reason to give details. Imagine if you're the person who lost someone and you see people are reading about what happened in intimate detail. Like Ashley Judd works with us because the way that media dealt with her mother's death by suicide was so traumatic for her that she goes and speaks to media all the time about the impact of effective reporting and the impact of negative reporting. And also the importance of sharing stories of hope and resources of where people can go. So the media plays a big role in suicide prevention. And we also funded a study that looked at the new media guidelines in Canada, and it showed that actually the guidelines help to reduce the rate of suicide after a suicide. So, of course, that's what we do. We fund research. We fund investigator-initiated research, which means we don't tell them what to study. They decide what to study. We have a very rigorous research process. I brought some brochures if anybody's interested in learning more or applying for a grant. But any topic that you can think of actually ends up being an avenue for study, and we learn more and more every day. I know I'm a researcher like through and through. Like I bought 2 challah the other day, one from one company and one from another. And then my goal was that could my family tell the difference and which one was better? I brought saltwater taffy from Virginia and from Boston, Cape Cod, to the whole office. Everybody took one of each, and I tallied up the results. And everybody except the person from Virginia preferred the Cape Cod. But the person from Virginia liked the Cape Cod. Go figure.
It's quite some level of research there.
It is annoying, but my granddaughter loves it.
But so what else, or what other aspects of either research, community outreach, right? We covered some of that, and education does AFSP do?
So we were founded in 1987 by some family members who lost family members to suicide and researchers. So research has always been at the foundation. 20% of our budget goes to research, which is why I just shared a graph with people, like before AFSP, between 1948 and 57, there were 3 articles written about suicide. And they were all about what you should do, but none of them were research. And if you look at the graph of when AFSP started, there's a steep incline to how much research has been done. So research is at the basis, but our mission is to save lives and bring hope to those affected by suicide. And we do that through research, education, advocacy, and support for people affected by suicide. So we have educational programs all the way from middle school, high school, college, general public for the Black community, the Hispanic community. We're working on one now for veteran community. And these are educational programs to help people understand instead of walking away, like my goal is, this is what I just made this up, but to turn hindsight into foresight. So what happens often is somebody loses someone to suicide, and often they think it's out of the blue. And then they look back, and they realize that there were some indications. I wouldn't even call them warning signs, because it's not like someone says, okay, I'm about to go, take my life. But they're little things, subtle things that you see along the way or know about the person. And so we do education so that people will know what to look for. What are some of the underlying risk factors? How do you have that conversation? What are resources that you can use to help somebody who may be thinking of taking their lives, or may be struggling with at all, or with a mental health condition, substance use? So education, public education, is very important. Now we do that at the workplace. We do that with clinicians, because it turns out clinicians, not surprisingly, never had training about what to do with suicide, because there was nothing to offer. But now we actually have treatments and interventions that they can be doing to help people. And so we have to train the workforce up.
So,
Yeah.
Follow-up question there. So you mentioned some resources for knowing what to do and so forth. Can you tell us some way that where online we would find it?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, come to afsp.org. And when you get there, you'll see things like, I've lost someone, I'm struggling, I want to learn more. It's a very dense website. And so I usually recommend people go in and come out. But there's a section there that says get help. And so we have general resources. We talk a little bit about what does it mean to get help, and how do you get, why should you get help? And then there are general resources, places to find treatment, which you don't have to be suicidal to do. It's just treatment resources. And then we have resources for underrepresented communities. So we have resources for, let's say, the Black community, the LGBTQ community, Latina community, Jewish, Arab community, Muslim communities. So you can take a deep dive into one of those, or you can look at some of the general resources. We also have things like a real convo guide, which is literally a guide about how to have a real conversation. What do you say? Because you don't start off with, hey, you thinking of killing yourself? You don't even, you start off with, how are you doing? I noticed, if there's things you noticed, I noticed that you haven't been coming to parties lately, you've been missing class, what? You went from an A student to a C student, and then, what's going on? Do you want to talk? And if they talk and they say, well, I'm not really feeling that great, what's going on? You just listen, no judgment. You don't have to fix it, just listen. And then in the course of that conversation, it's perfectly reasonable to say, sometimes when people feel like that, they think of taking their lives. Are you thinking of that? And if you are, you can tell me because I can help you get help. And that's it. And you can call 988 together. If you're with somebody who's actively suicidal in a room, you can actually call 988 for them. And then they will give you guidance about what to do and also hopefully get them on the phone. And that's just a conversation. It's really just a conversation. But it opens the door to someone who thinks that there's no other options, that this is it. Like some people have said when they were just about to do something and somebody said, are you okay? That was enough to break that cycle in that moment. So there's real convo guides is another. There's for parents, veterinarians, because it turns out veterinarians have a higher rate of suicide. There's toolkits for if there's been a suicide in your school, how to handle that, because how you handle it is very important to what happens next. So I always tell people, go into the website, fish around, and come out. Now, I am also very proud of the research section, which is a little bit hard to find. But if you go to afsp.org/research, we have all our grants, which are really fascinating. But we also have all our publications, people's publications from the research. But we have a section with videos. They're like, I call it the Wikipedia of suicide prevention. It's like 1 to 2 minute videos about different aspects of suicide. So if somebody asks you a question is suicide genetic? There's a little video from a genetic researcher about yes or no. One of my favorites is about oxidative stress, which sounds very complicated, but in the end, he's talking about why he rides his mountain bike every day to keep his telomere short, because oxidative stress ages your brain, and that's associated with suicide. So even when they're complicated topics, they're actually kind of fun and simple. But then we also have a whole social media section, and from July to December, we had 4.5 million engagements, 5.5 million impressions, because we have TikTok reels and infographics that talk about the research and the research finding. And the member of my department who does that is great at it. And so the first one we did was on grief. It wasn't quite related to suicide, and it was World Mental Health Day, and TikTok escalated it, and we got 6.2 million views. So to me, again, starting in a field where nobody would talk about it, it's just incredible. And they're really just meant to help you understand. One is about sleep, how sleep makes you cranky, basically. It makes you not make great decisions. So if you're worried about someone, ask them how they're sleeping. Like, they always have a little action to it. And they're just meant to share what we've learned from research. I once did one for CVS on seasonal affective disorder. And I did it on a lot of stuff. I just talked and they made little things. But one of them was on seasonal affective disorder, and I really didn't think anything of it. But over 1 million people viewed it, and someone I know came to me and said, you did a video. I was like, how do you know I did a video? Her friend said, I want you to watch this video so you can understand what I experience every year. And so when we talk to the public, and I don't mean this just about AFSP, although of course that's important to my heart, we make a big difference. Like, it's really, really incredible what a difference we can make.
Thank you for telling us more about, all the different sort of aspects, research, community outreach, and education, all the different aspects that AFSP is involved.
Advocacy.
And advocacy, yes, that the organization is involved in. And about education, I was wondering if you could give us a sort of a clearer sense or more specific of what an educational program or / event might look like at a school or at work and on the job.
Well, we have chapters in all 50 states, so our volunteers from our chapters give the programs. We train them so that they're being given pretty much the same way by everyone. They're usually slide presentation. We give them a guidebook and a frequently asked questions. And it mostly talks about helping people, like, how frequent is suicide? What contributes to it? What are risk factors and warning signs? How do you have that conversation? Where do you go for help? What happens when somebody gets help? And then there are some, in our more, for specific communities, we talk about suicide in that community and how to have that conversation, because sometimes it's different from community to community. Suicide isn't really that different, but sometimes there's other signs, or signs look a little different. And it's about a 45-minute to hour program, and it's really like 101. It's called, our signature program is Talk Saves Lives, and the one for the Black community is Let's Save Lives. And I don't speak Spanish, so I can't really say what we say Talk Saves Lives for the Latinx community, but it's in Spanish and it's given by Spanish-speaking people. So those are some of our basic knowledge. The in-class programs, It's Real, are also slideshows, but they're geared towards younger audiences, but still the same information, just so that if you kind of get a sense of, when should I worry about somebody, and what can I do to make a difference? And what can I do for myself if I'm feeling this way? Because there's almost always somebody in the audience. And we also know that more than half of people have lost someone to suicide. So it's really a basic education so that if you see something, you can do something. Then I'm trying to think of other programs. Then we have our clinician training program, where we go to various health locations, and it's similar, but it has more of a, like, what can a clinician do? And how do you set up your office for it? How do you have those conversations? How do you talk about limiting access to lethal means? Those kinds of things. So they're very specific to and actionable. That's our goal. Start a conversation, get some knowledge, and be actionable.
And so, for instance, thank you for all this information and these details. When we're talking about programs in schools, are so to speak, the facilitators, the presenters, are they close in age to meaning are there young people presenting in schools?
We don't have young people present. We have our adult volunteers, but college students can do it if they're trained. The important thing is to be trained, because people are going to ask questions. And also you want to be sensitive to the audience. It's a challenge to be clear and direct, but also understand that people who are experiencing it are in pain. and we care about them and don't want to cause any pain by talking about it in a way that would feel uncomfortable. I just did a clinician training because a congregant had lost his wife to suicide, and he wanted everyone to be trained, but he was only 4 months out from the loss. So it was a little challenging because the clinicians need to know what to say and ask, and you can be a little more blunt and forthcoming, and they have real questions about it. So we always check in. I checked in with him. He was okay, and he was glad we were doing it. But it's a balance. So if anybody here, I hope, is either lost someone or experiencing their own, I hope you feel that you're being treated kindly, because that's the most important thing. But not tell things that aren't true.
Yes, absolutely. And so, still speaking about research, I would love for you to tell us a little more about and you did hint to that already, all the different aspects of research that AFSP funds. But if you can, I would love for you to tell us more about it. And also, sort of historically speaking, how fast is the implementation of sort of the findings from the research that you fund in the AFSP advocacy work, education work, and community outreach work, right? There is, of course, some lag time, which is sort of physiological, I would say, right? But so both aspects. Thank you.
Right. So there are different aspects of that. So when we fund a study, actually we're just working on this today, one of the things we look at is how many publications come out of it, how many people are publishing, and also how many people go on to get larger federal grants. I'm not going to say like what's going to happen now, but you can't do that like a year after you give the grants, and in fact you can't really tell until at least 5 years after the grant. Because our applications are, let's say we got applications in November of 24. They won't get funded till 25. And then they won't start till, some of them don't start till 26. Because they have to get our institutional review board approval. And then it's 2 years to do the grant. And then they may need what we call a no-cost extension, because research is slow, particularly with suicide, where it takes a while to accumulate the people you need to study. So that's already 5 or 6 years. So at least 5 or 6 years and more for one study. And findings it's not like you do a study, you get a finding, and it turns into action. Validity is accrued over studies. But one of the things that I started is I don't know what I was thinking, a research update, a quarterly research update for our staff. Because we use the research to inform everything we do. Research underlies all our programs, all our advocacy. I'm actually going to do a congressional briefing on gambling and suicide in a couple of weeks. So I'll do a research update and bring together all that we know so far in the research and what are the limitations of that. And then that becomes a resource for our programs. And and if there's like gambling came up as an area of interest, so then I said, I'll do the next research update on that. And I'm very picky about research. Like, I don't just accept the abstract. First of all, the abstract's only 150 words, so not everything is in there, but also the methods are very, very important to look at when you draw conclusions from research. But it does make its way into everything we do. We will only share information that has some research behind it. And I want to say something about our advocacy, because you can become an advocate very easily. If you go to our advocacy center on the website, you just put your name and address where you vote in, and whenever there's federal or state legislation that's related to suicide prevention or mental health, we'll send you a little email with everything written. And there's always a space to write something in if you want, but if you don't, you just want to send it, you just push send and it goes. They count how many contacts they have on a particular issue. And if they have more than 10, then they actually take a deeper dive into the issue. And that is how we got 988, because AFSP advocates swamp their offices. And 988 came not just with the crisis hotline, but a subsequent crisis services legislation that expands for crisis centers and mobile crisis centers. So it's really important that for anything in the legislature that you let your voice be heard, and it does make a difference. People think it doesn't, but it really makes a difference. We also have advocacy days in all 50 states when they meet. Turns out not every state meets every year. I didn't know that. And we go and we talk to legislators about, and we train you up. We have all our information. If you want to see what we're advocating for, just come to our advocacy center. Everything, we set up goals for 2 years, and everything. We're very transparent. You can, anything we're doing, it's there. So I highly recommend that.
Thank you. Yes, there's a question.
Sorry, I'm teaching, so I'm sorry.
No problem.
I wondered if you could talk more about for college professors and how, because, I mean, I can train myself, but also that there are laws in place about what I have to do in my office hours if someone talks about wanting to injure themselves. And so you feel like you're in this very fine ballet. So if you talked about this already, I'm sorry.
No, I haven't.
But I also wonder what programs exactly Villanova has, because I've heard bad things about some and good things about some, and I just wondered if you could hear more about that in training.
So the Villanova part would be more of what you should speak to, but every state is different as to whether or not there are laws or not, and the laws are mostly about training. But one of the problems with the laws is it says if someone mentions that they're thinking of killing themselves, they set off this cascade of things that are often not really necessary. And what you really need to do is have a conversation. And if you're not sure, well, you can talk about the counseling center, but every college complains about their counseling center. When I got into this field, there were only 38 college counseling centers in the country.
Wow.
So it's good that we have it. They can be helpful for most people. Also, if the counseling center isn't great on your campus, which I have no idea about here, then students have a way of finding other resources and also working with them to get it better, or working with the administration. But there was a time when nobody had counseling centers, so it's an important thing to remember. Can you say anything about here, or how it works, or who you call, or what?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys want to jump in, but I know there are programs like Inquire, Persuade, and Report, that training that one can take. And definitely the care team and the counselors themselves, right, are a first step.
Yeah, so we're always in available for consultation for faculty. So if you ever have a student who's coming into your office and expressing anything of concern, you can always give us a call. We're obviously available by phone during the day. We're also on call over the evening hours. And then to your point, we also run a program, or we facilitate programs called QPR, which is Question, Persuade, Refer, where we will host sort of training programs to talk about having a conversation and how to have the conversation, how to bring up really difficult topics and eventually persuade the student to seek services or seek help. So those are all available. And if it feels like your department would like something like that, like a training like that, please just contact us and let us know.
What is your office?
I'm at the counseling center.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, yes, go ahead.
So if you come to our website, and there's a section on walks, and you put in your, there's a section for college walks, and you can just put your zip code in, and it tells you where walks would be near you. We did start a schedule too, but it's, you can do the same thing. You put in your zip code, it'll tell you. On the top masthead, you can put in, you'll see walks, community walks, and the campus walks are in there. If you want to start one, the thing to do is to, when you get to the chapter page, there's a staff person to contact, and we have somebody who's dedicated specifically to campus walks, and that person can connect you with the campus walk team. And they work with you along the way, every step along the way.
Yeah, somehow I was trying to get to the walks.
Oh, that's what a walk is like. It's really sedate, you know. You can see how boring and dull it is.
Find a walk near you, so.
We open it to questions from the audience, maybe
Yeah.
starting with the students.
Are you okay with it?
Sure, go ahead.
I was just going to throw in on that walk question too. Like, there are people from the Mental Health and Wellbeing Committee here, like Father Bernie, raise your hand, and then Dr. Post, who just spoke, that they oversee a health and wellbeing committee that has students, faculty, and staff on it. And one of the things they do is get input on ideas. So if someone was interested in looking at, should we have, or do we want to host a campus walk here, even before you leave today, you could, chat with them, because they would be good point people here on campus.
I can chat with you, but I'm not involved with the walks. So the best thing is to, like, what I will tell you is to go to the walk part, but you can email me and I can send you the link also. I only say that because we're in the middle of our grant review process and they're in the middle of arranging the campus walks. So it may be actually too late for this year, but for next year or in the fall. But if you contact me, Harkavy-Friedman at afsp.org, I can connect you with the person that you want to do. Philadelphia has a huge community walk also, like with thousands of people. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and actually,
You go, right?
yes, and our guest speaker last semester was Anthony Rostain, Dr. Anthony Rostain, who's a psychiatrist, an MD, and has a master's in sociology. And 2 years ago, he lost his own son to suicide. And he spoke that he lost his son in May. The Philly walk is always the first Sunday of October. He was invited to speak to open up the walk. And there's a video on your website, actually, of his presentation, sort of his speech at the beginning of that walk, and the words that he used in that talk at the beginning of that October walk were the words that I sort of decided and I suggested we use for the title to that conversation with Dr. Rostain, which was bringing suicide out of the darkness, and so which we are sort of discussing in a different way, but it's the same thing. And so, and definitely he had already been involved with AFSP because of his interest and his profession, but definitely again with the devastating loss of his son, he was all the more connected, all the more involved.
I just want to say that, by the way, the Out of the Darkness comes from William Styron's book, Out of the Darkness, where he writes about his own depression. And that was the title, and he was involved with us for a very long time.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that, but I know, of course, I've read the book and all the rest of it. But any questions then?
Yes.
I've always heard it kind of said that suicide is not supposed to cry for help. Do you find that to typically be true? Suicide is not supposed to cry for help.
You know, I'm so glad you asked that because, first of all, you could die from a suicide attempt even if you don't fully attend, so it's dangerous. But the way I view it is, if a person knows how to get help, they get it. If they're trying to get help by, trying to take their life, then they need help to learn how to get help. And that's where treatment and help comes in, to help them learn other ways. So in a way, it is, but you could die from it. But it also is because if they knew how to do it another way, they would. And it's like when people say it's manipulative, and I'm like, we're all manipulative. We all try to do things and get things that we want. But if we don't know how to do it in a safe and healthy way, we're going to do it in other ways that are not healthy. And so it's kind of, the good news is that we can learn and we can change, and also problem solving, coping, resilience, and even our brains can change. So that it's not like if you don't know how to do it, you're stuck. You can learn how to do it. I have to say, we funded another cool study that imaged people's brains before and after treatment and showed that the people who had a certain lower functioning in their brain, not low functioning like intellect, but that they gained a lot from treatment and they improved and their brain function changed. So in a way, I think the answer is yes, because they don't know what else to do. But no, in terms of they're trying to get you to do something that nobody else would try to do if they knew how.
For Dr. Jill, in your opinion, how effective are support groups in terms of treating suicide?
Support, I mean, it depends on the group, obviously, but there are many different types of groups that can be very helpful. So support groups can be helpful if they are directed by someone where there's also going to be some skill training and problem solving and coping and resiliency training. What you don't want is have a group where everybody just sits around talking about being suicidal, right? So also for survivors of suicide loss, it's incredibly helpful. And we also have a program called Healing Conversations, where if you've lost someone to suicide, we'll pair you with somebody who's a few years out. And it's a single conversation. But when you have no idea what's going to happen and you feel so low, it's going to be really helpful. DBT skills training, so DBT is dialectical behavior therapy. Those kinds of groups are very helpful, particularly for people who do need to learn, which, by the way, we all need to learn social emotional skills. I mean, let's face it. But so they can be very good. So it's finding the group that's right for you, and then it can be very helpful. Yes, I saw you back there. Well, one of the biggest things is that with kids, other kids are their support person often, but they need to tell an adult. We never want to put kids in a position of having to be the responsible party in that. And so with kids, we're always trying to help them tell an adult. But you have to find an adult who knows what to do and not an adult who's going to say, forget about it, it's no big deal. So we often say a trusted adult. Now, it's up to schools and families to make sure that every child has at least one trusted adult. And it may not be the parent, that just doesn't always work. So parents have to understand that you may not be the go-to person for your child, but as long as your child has a go-to person, that's important. The other thing is that cognitive and social development is very important with kids because they have more connection with current rewards. It's a little bit harder to look towards the future and say, well, I feel crummy now, but I'm going to feel better later. So kids and teens in particular, actually do make more suicide attempts. But fortunately, I guess, they do not die by suicide as often. So it's skill building because they may not have the skills. It's difficulty finding out what's going on with the child and helping them have the communication skills, but also being able to understand their mental health. Sometimes things look different in kids than they look in adults, like irritability. That's a sign that you want to worry about. Problems with sleep, another sign. Aggression, those things aren't always present. But there are things that you want to look at that look a little different in kids. But the most important thing is to be able to have those conversations. The same non-judgmental, I think respectful. People forget that kids are people. And I think if we treat people with compassion and respect, even if they're two, you'll have that bond and that relationship too. They don't always have the language, but a lot of it is still the same, but you have to rely on the adults around them, which isn't always easy. frankly.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, to what? So that's a great question. So we funded researcher Adam Mueller. You know her?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so, and she had other funding also, to go into 3 schools. 2 had previous suicide of students, and 1 had multiple suicides, and 1 school didn't have any. And she studied them ethnographically by talking to everybody, really, students, teachers, the cafeteria people, the housekeeping, and counseling, and then actually she wrote a book about one of them.
If you want to contextualize, or I can do it, that she is at Indiana University and she co-wrote a book. She's the main writer on a book with Seth Abrutin, who works in Canada, called Under Pressure, and I believe it's part of that fund. I mean, it's a result of that funding, and yeah.
So then I had the good fortune to listen to her present to Colorado school districts what she had found, which is not that easy because you want to present things in a constructive way about what can be done, and you don't want to scold people for doing things that they probably didn't know was contributing. And she was just brilliant at it. So she took this very detailed analysis. People also do social networking analyses. So there are a lot of sociological designs that you can apply to understand and then prevent suicide.
If I may, before you guys, and thank you, one powerful thing about the discussion about support groups and young people and how we can sort of overcome the crisis is that, and the importance of support group is also part of the sort of the stigma that comes with the fact that we don't talk about suicide. So people, whether suicidal themselves or people that have lost people to suicide, find themselves sort of in a double sort of set of pain and suffering. One, for having lost the person, and then having lost the person to this particular cause, suicide, self-inflicted death, that nobody wants to talk about. And so they don't have literally the social opportunities to heal talking about that aspect, right? That person didn't die of a cold, right? There's something very powerful, right, alas, to that.
I'm happy to say that it's changing. That people are talking about it. I was on a train going No, but I was on the train going to an overnight walk, and there was a young woman there. She asked what we were doing, and she said, "Oh, I was in the hospital last year at this time for having made a suicide attempt, and I got help." And I mean, she was completely open about it. I got help, and now I'm going to meet my future in-laws, and I'm so glad, So even walking down the street yesterday from the subway to my office, there were 3 people, I'm guessing they were lawyers, walking to my building, and one young woman ran into the other 2, and she goes, "Oh, I'm just coming from therapy." And they're like talking, and she goes, "And if I say anything, just know that I'm getting help." So you had, yeah, go ahead.
Thomas and...
I think that's a great question, because we make it sound like everybody's going to say, "Oh, yes, and this is what I'm thinking and doing." And it doesn't really work that way. So that's where Seize the Awkward is really helpful, because it shows things like just going for a cup of coffee. The thing is to be persistent and patient. And you can't force somebody to talk about it, and you don't want to put them in a position where they're avoiding you because they don't want to talk about it. So it's that balance between saying, "I really care about you and I'm worried about you. This is what I see. Do you want to talk?" They say, "No, I'm fine. They say, "Okay, well, I'm here. And if you ever want to talk, but if not, you can always call 988, and there's people there who, if you're not feeling well, who can help you get care. There's a counseling center. But I'm here, so I'll check in again, and if you want to just come up to me, you can come up. I understand. Like, no judgment. Like, I care about you. And it's a little scary to do that, but it's really important. And if they don't want to talk, respect that, but let them know that you are worried and what you see, and that there are opportunities for them to get help. But you can't force somebody. And it happens a lot. I'm fine. I don't need to talk. No, nothing there. But you know there is, so trust your gut, because maybe nobody else is going to approach them.
Can you follow up on that? In that situation, are there any reliable cues that one can use to say, well, I need to refer this friend of mine to somebody
Right.
who has more skill than me, because so maybe the answer is there aren't any.
Well, there are sometimes things that people see. But I also want to say, if you're worried about someone and they're not responding to you, but you have friends in common or a resident advisor or a professor, talk with them about your worry. You don't have to hold it alone. So, and together you can kind of figure out how to approach them. Or go to the counseling center and say, you're worried about someone, and what can you do? So you don't have to go it alone. But so what are the things that people might show? And, warning signs, we call them warning signs, but they could be 2 years before. They're not necessarily in that moment, right? So there's things people say, things they do, and the way they feel. So they might say something like, well, next year this won't matter. Or they might go tell they might say, I'm such a burden. I don't want to talk because I'm such a burden. I don't belong here. Things are never going to get better. Nothing's going to change. You'll be better off without me. And these subtle things that we often just chalk up to, like, oh, it's a bad week, a bad month, a bad year, a bad teacher, trouble at work. We're very forgiving, and so we kind of write it off. So I really encourage you to not write it off. Take note, and even check in at that moment. Don't wait for it to be a crisis. The things they do, so drugs and alcohol changes in sleep, changes in appetite. Insomnia is a big, like if somebody's not sleeping, that's a big concern. Because sleep, if you're not sleeping, you're going to be much more emotionally reactive and less able to control your actions. Doing things that are reckless, because that's what reckless means. Like, you don't care what happens to you, right? So giving away things that are important to you, telling people you love them. These are all things that people do that may indicate that somebody's struggling. Because we don't usually go around and say, I really want you to have my favorite guitar, right? Because it's your favorite guitar, but if you feel like you're not going to be there, then you want somebody to have it who cares about it. And then there's moods. And we all think about depression and depressed mood, and that's often there. But also agitation, hopelessness, irritability, humiliation. When people are ashamed or humiliated, that's always a time of concern. Somebody failed something that everybody else didn't, or they believe nobody else failed except them. That I would worry about them and check in, even if you're not worried about them technically. Anything that's particularly humiliating or they might feel ashamed about. And I think what you said about stigma, recently we've been trying to reframe stigma in negative attitudes, because in reality, the other person has negative attitudes about something. It's not about you. You shouldn't feel, whatever you feel is okay. And also we can change attitudes. And in fact, they do change. And education is one of those things that changes attitudes. So, yeah.
Dissipated a little bit, like how long does that last for? Assuming that you do the next step and they get some help.
Right. We're actually funding some research now. We don't really know, but we know that there has to be more than just a conversation down the road. Like that gets them through the crisis. But protective factors are also something you carry around with you all the time. Coping strategies, problem-solving skills, willingness to get help and having help available to you, and having supportive family. And another thing that's really strong protective factor is having a sense of identity and self, knowing who you are, and knowing that some people might not like that, and that's okay, but you're okay with who you are. But sometimes spirituality is another thing that can help, but sometimes those things go by the wayside when somebody's in a crisis. You know?
Are there any online apps or mental health tools that you could kind of get access to right away if you are starting to identify some of these factors that you talked about to just kind of try and nip it in the bud as soon as possible?
For yourself. Yeah, so there's a great thing called safety planning, which actually the best app is from the VA. So safety planning is, and you can just get it online if you want. I have it on my phone, so if you want to see it, anyone wants to see it later. But that's the best one. And what a safety plan is a plan for safety. So the first thing it starts with is, what are the things, how do you know when you're starting to go down that road of discouragement and not feeling well, and like maybe it's you're having trouble sleeping, maybe it's you're not going to class, whatever it is, what are your warning signs? And then the first step is, what can you do personally by yourself to help yourself de-escalate? So I always like to make sure everybody puts breathing on that because it's portable, but it might be exercise. For some people it's watching a sad movie, some people it's watching a happy movie, you know, but you literally list off things that you can do. And the point of a safety plan is when you're in a crisis or crummy moment, that's not the time to start thinking about what you can do. So then after that is, who are people you could distract yourself with? Like, you don't even have to tell them that you're not feeling great, but you can just be with them and you feel better. Then it's who can you talk to in your family and friends? And you have to actually tell them. I might call you and say, I'm feeling crummy. You don't have to fix me, but can we just talk? Then the professionals, if you have a therapist, your therapist would be there, 988 would be there. If you like Trevor line or RAIN or whatever hotline you might gravitate to. And then there's limiting access to lethal means. If you're thinking about doing something, how will you get rid of it? Either temporarily or permanently. And then reasons for living, things that keep you going. And that's the hardest part when you're in a crisis, so you really want to do that before. And sometimes it's really hard to dig deep and find something when you feel that terrible. Like I once worked with someone and finally came up with, well, I really want to see what the next Assassin's Creed is going to be. I was like, I'll take it. It's coming out in a month. We got a month to figure out something else. And then you have that plan. You give it to people who care about you. Put it on your refrigerator if you want. Carry it on your phone or your pocket. And then if you start to feel that way, and you might say, you know, I can't distract myself, I'm too far gone. Then you call the person that's on your list, and you have their phone number there, so you don't even have to look it up. Because who knows anybody's phone number now? I know nobody's phone number. There used to be an app called My3, where you would literally program the 3 people, and you just push a button, but they didn't keep up with it. And so, but Safety Plan app is something that really helpful. You will?
It's 24/7 counseling services.
Oh, great. You will. And it's an app, You Will?
Yeah, you can go to our website and it'll take you right to how to sign up.
Oh, that's great. And there are other, like if you have a particular interest, like for veterans, there's often apps that have information and also you can get to a person, or you have your 988 always. Like I said, the Trevor hotline, which is now a part of 988, by the way. It's one of the digits. The first is for veterans, the second is for Spanish, the third is for LGBTQ. So I would say find what works for you, and then it's all about using it. And most people will, and it works pretty well. Because, like I said, in a crisis moment, you don't want to start thinking about what you have to do. So it's your safety plan. If you find you can't do it, then, and you should do it with somebody if you can, like have somebody help you develop your safety plan. But if it's not working for you anymore, then you can add something to it. It's a living document. You have a fight with one of the friends on it and you don't call them anymore, take them off. No big deal, take them off.